Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Category Palooza. We're just kicking off our third session here. Brian and I were chatting a little bit backstage about where we're from and where we went to school. And we've definitely been trying to make today a very interactive day. So, for a little bit of a change up, not where you grew up, not where you're from, but where did you go to college? Pop that into the chat and let you know. We'll sort of see all the different places that people are from. Now, as we get to know a little bit more about all of your backgrounds, I want to share a little bit more with you about this session and my speaker. I love a good Mythbusters session. And in this particular session, we're going to take a look at group purchasing organizations, or GPOs. Maybe challenge some of the things we all think we know about them, some of those long-standing assumptions that we've all held, and how that might factor into whether we're potentially under-leveraging their benefits in certain categories of spend. Now, to help me do that, I'm joined by Brian Halpin. He is a vice president and general manager at Procure Analytics, and we're going to talk through some case examples and some things today just to demystify some of the things that we've all probably had in the back of our minds were true. So, Brian, first of all, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate it.
I'm going to put the same question I put to the audience to you. We got the countdown just as we were getting ready to go. Where did you go to college?
So undergrad, I finished at a small school in northeastern PA called Wilkes University, maybe 2,000 students. And then I did university in Bethlehem, PA.
Well, that certainly starts to answer the question of how you got from PA into being an expert in GPOs. Did you start out in supply chain and move to procurement, or did you go straight from sort of that supply chain academic background directly into a procurement role?
Yeah, really straight into procurement. I started my career while I was pursuing my MBA with a small consultancy that specialized in strategic sourcing. And during my MBA, had a fabulous professor who comes from the sourcing in the auto parts space for Mopar, and just sparked some interest. And I saw it as a useful field. And 25 years later, here I am, having been a procurement professional, both in the industry space for about half my career, then spent the other half in the consulting space, which I think gives me a little bit of credibility for what we're going to talk about here today.
Absolutely. And it's funny, for anybody that's listened to the Art of Procurement podcast, you'll know that Phil's trademark intro question is, did you find procurement or did procurement found you? And it's roughly a 99% procurement found people, 1% they found procurement. You might be part of that 1%, Brian. Do you think you are?
I am. I'm always the outlier.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to our main topic for today then. Procurement loves our TLAs, our three-letter acronyms, and GPO is one of those on the list. So for some of the people in our audience who maybe don't have direct firsthand experience working with or through a GPO to source categories, can you just give us a very brief overview of what is a GPO and how do they typically factor into the overall procurement structure?
Yes, and I lost a little bit of your question there, but sure. In terms of what is a GPO, I mean, very simply put, it's a leverage purchasing program where many companies can pool their purchasing requirements, typically within specified spend categories, under a common commercial arrangement with suppliers. Typically, they're free to members as long as you meet certain kind of limited membership requirements.
Now, in advance of today, you had shared with us a list of the common myths that we're going to dispel during this section. Let's go through those one at a time. So, myth number one, GPOs only benefit suppliers. Let's start by taking that one apart.
Yeah, sure. Well, I won't deny it. They do benefit suppliers, but those benefits do typically work their way down to the member. Right. So suppliers do see GPOs as a valuable sales channel, and that's why they participate in them. But by doing so, there's a lower cost to the supplier to sell and to serve to those companies that are a part of the membership, because the GPO itself is providing account management resources and other cost elements. Right. So this gets reflected down to pricing into the member, and it's part of the commercials construct that allows them to give such competitive pricing to the members within the GPO. Also, the GPOs themselves are constantly negotiating better terms with their suppliers on behalf of their members, and particularly as the membership and their buying power increases, that gets further reflected down to the members. And also, probably unbeknownst to a lot of folks that aren't familiar with GPOs, they do periodically take those relationships with suppliers out to market competitively to ensure that the GPO is offering the best supplier set and solutions out to their membership.
All right, so let's move on to the second myth about GPOs. GPOs only benefit small companies who end up riding on the volume-based coattails of big companies.
Yeah, sure. So this is really a common misunderstanding. Prices within the GPO aren't indexed off the highest volume member. It's really the collective volume. And no matter how large your spend is, you're never going to have the purchasing power of 1,000 companies. And additionally, each company's product mix is different. So often a smaller company may come into the GPO that's in a different industry and may have high spend in some categories or subcategories that aren't high volume for your business. So the larger company actually ends up benefiting from the smaller company's spend.
You know, this is an interesting one to me. One of the things, Brian, that we had discussed in the opening session is that for some of the topics we're taking on today that are a little bit more category specific, two examples are packaging and energy and utilities, that oftentimes it's our learnings in one category that allow us to manage another. And I think this idea about smaller companies being forced to sort of accept what larger companies in the GPO have negotiated could actually play on something we've experienced internally to procurement. I know for me, when I was a practitioner, we had multiple business units. I was in grocery retail, and we had, I think at the time it was 5 retail chains and a food service company that were all part of the company. And that dynamic absolutely existed, that whether it was sort of the overall influence of the individual brand, or whether it was the amount of spend a given brand or business unit had per category, you sort of get used to this dynamic where everybody's pretending the decision making is equal, but it's not actually equal. This is one of those dynamics where I can see not even necessarily a myth based on our experience with GPOs, but based on how we've all sort of been programmed to think about the decision making process happening. So in some ways, GPOs may provide something of a leveling opportunity for smaller companies.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And we certainly see benefits across the size spectrum and industry spectrum for all of our members. As I mentioned, even some of the largest companies, we have Fortune 100 companies in our membership roles, and they benefit greatly. But those smaller companies, they do receive the benefits of they're able to actually buy, like a larger company. And because of the construct of the GPO, where, for example, our account management is working with each of our individual members to make sure that their specific needs and product mix and service requirements are met under our construct. So they have the benefit of, in our case, $1.5 billion buying group taking their specific needs to negotiation directly with the supplier partners.
Now, this next myth is another good one, because I know everybody in procurement has heard this in some context or other. The idea that if your business is unique, that GPO pricing would be too much of a catalog approach to fit the unique product mix and service requirements of your company. How many times has procurement approached a business owner or a business unit and they've said, no, my spend is different. This situation is unique. You couldn't possibly help me manage that. So how is my business or spend or category being too unique a myth as being a challenge for GPOs?
Yeah, this one can be difficult to overcome. I had an old colleague that used to say, everybody is terminally unique. But there is truth, right? Every business is unique to some degree, right? No two product or service mix requirements are the same. Even if your needs vary from the collective membership, though, under our arrangement, you're still benefiting from that aggregate volume leverage. And the better GPOs, and this is important to understand, is that they are frequently negotiating on behalf of those individual members to ensure that their product mix, their individual service needs are being addressed by the program. So, I said that this is a common construct, but there's a significant level of tailoring to address the specific commercial needs of each individual member company.
One of the things I want to ask a quick follow-up question about, you've mentioned sort of this frequent negotiation a couple of times. That suggests to me that the GPO is constantly in contact with representatives from the different suppliers. What does that, and I know this is very general, but what does that suggest to us maybe about the nature of the relationship between not even the customer and the supplier, but the GPO itself and those suppliers that they're so frequently negotiating with?
Yeah, that's a great call out because, heard a little bit about, relationships in the previous session and, EQ over IQ.
Yeah.
But I know our organization, and I think I'm speaking for GPOs in general, there's a lot leveraged with each of these individual supplier partners. We, Procure Analytics, my organization, may be a little bit different in that we are kind of highly leveraged in one spend area, being MRO, maintenance, repair, and operation supplies. There's a handful of key suppliers in that area. If you look at our collective membership, we represent the largest or second largest private sector customer to most of the suppliers that are in our mix of suppliers. So obviously our business is incredibly important to them.
Yeah.
And our relationship with them is truly one of partnership. So we are, obviously working with them to understand how we can, better help kind of grow their business and their wallet share, within our membership, while still maintaining competitive tension and making sure that they understand that they need to meet the needs of our members. When there are issues, right, and there are things that need to be escalated with those suppliers,
Yeah.
and often with a small company, right, that individually may have very little kind of spend leverage that they can take to the C level of a supplier to be able to get their needs met. We act as an agent for them, and we have that kind of collective power of the $1.5 billion of spend and key important strategic supplier, and be able to kind of represent their needs as if they were a very large organization.
So we've talked about this combined spend and the economies of scale that allows GPOs to achieve, which actually is a great transition to GPO myth number 4, which is that the only value GPOs provide is price discounts or savings. And this is something that procurement has been trying to get beyond in terms of our own value proposition. How is this a myth both about procurement, certainly, but about GPOs as well?
Yeah, so there's a lot of non-price benefits that I didn't mention already. First of all, a good GPO is really acting as an extension of the procurement team. So it's kind of on-demand professional category management support. And what that means is you have a team that can actually identify value drivers within your purchasing requirements, and set up projects and manage projects, such as a SKU rationalization project, or looking for a functional alternative product that can give you the same benefits at a lower cost. These are things that take resources, and very limited resources typically within a procurement organization to run. We spend a fair amount of our time actually running those types of projects for our members. In addition, right, beyond just price, there's the other commercial benefits. Typically, you're getting payment terms that are extended beyond what you may typically be able to negotiate on your own. Things like free shipping or free value-added services. What we do a lot of is a vendor-managed inventory or consignment type arrangements on behalf of our members. And another really important one, the previous session was talking about leveraging robust data.
Yes.
We work in a spend category that is just incredibly fragmented data. Most companies just don't have really good internal purchasing data. Through our program, we're actually aggregating the spend data, the detailed spend data of all the suppliers that we work with, and providing that back to our members in what is effectively a spend cube type environment, really actionable, insightful, analytical data that they can then use and we can use with them to drive further value.
So we have one more GPO myth then, and that's that strategic sourcing events are the only way that GPOs optimize. What are some of the other ways that GPOs can help procurement optimize spend?
Yeah, well, in addition to, when we look at GPOs, one of the biggest advantages that we provide is that running a sourcing event individually can be incredibly time and resource intensive. Through a GPO relationship, you effectively get, I don't want to call it a turnkey solution, because there is a lot of customization and tailoring that goes on between us and our individual members. But what you're getting is effectively the advantages of an outsourced category management solution for that in-scope category. And that typically yields much better results than running an RFP yourself, particularly in really data-intensive categories like MRO, where we work, where we found that running an RFP individually, you may get great results back from that RFP based on the market basket of spend that was put out, but that may only represent 40-50% of your actual next year's spend. So the suppliers have gotten really smart about that, and what they do is they really deeply discount the market basket products, show great recognized or identified savings through an RFP process. But then when you actually start buying, you end up typically with a pretty different product mix. They're margining up on the things that weren't within that market basket, so that those identified savings rarely get translated into realized savings.
So you've taken us through these 5 GPO myths. These are things that, excuse me, we've all known that are not true. But then you happen to mention that there's something that's going on with GPOs that a lot of us don't happen to know at all. And that's that consulting companies heavily leverage GPOs to deliver a lot of the savings. So let me sort of ask you 2 parts on this. Why is it that consultancies leverage GPOs so frequently? And why is it that a lot of procurement professionals might not know?
Yeah, great question. So we work with a number of leading procurement practices. They found that scoping and executing sourcing events in certain spend categories is really a poor use of their resources, and then by extension, their clients' consulting dollars. In those categories, GPOs not only offer compelling value, but really importantly for them, speed to savings that's not typically available, via an RFP process that could take 3 to 6 months many times to come to fruition. So consultants, they'll review a client's spend file, and they'll put that spend through a set of filters to identify the savings potential, and then they'll evaluate the effort associated with running an effective savings program. I think I gave you a graphic if you want to pull it up.
You did. I'd be glad to pull that up.
Yeah, so many in our audience are probably familiar with what you're going to see. It's a common 4-box category management model. It's known as Kralich's matrix. That model was really designed to address how to segment a spend portfolio for a spend management approach. A little bit of a minor tweak to that model is what you see here, with more of a focus on the specific sourcing tactic than an overall management approach. But this is really applicable to how consultants approach client spend because they're working on time-bound engagements, not necessarily multi-year strategies, right? It's critical here to understand that consultants evaluate how to drive savings for their clients within a given scope of work, right? So that means that they have a limited amount of consulting hours and budget with which to deliver successful savings results to their clients so that they can prove out the ROI of their engagement. So clearly they need to have their resources allocated more heavily to the high impact category. So if you look in the top left, or the top half of the graphic rather, you'll see this is where the savings are really high. On the top left, is the spend where really savings can be delivered quickly through a simple RFP approach. These areas typically take a smaller allocation of lower cost or less experienced consultants because they're typically a playbook for how to run these things. They can run that playbook and generate strong results. These are really what I'd call the cash cows within the sourcing or sourcing as a service space that the consultants work in. That frees up kind of their heavy hitter resources to run those higher effort, the complex plays that you would see on the upper right-hand side, right? It requires more nuance, a more strategic approach. So they can kind of highlight their capabilities and deliver those really game-changing results. These are the things that end up resulting in, case studies and white papers that you'll see on the internet. So that leaves few resources really to address the things that are on the lower half of this graphic. Sometimes they'll simply leave these things out of scope. Shrewd consultancies, right? And I'm talking about some of the real experts in the procurement space. They recognize that if they can offer solutions here that deliver savings and process efficiency quickly with minimal investment of their consulting hours, it maximizes the ROI they can deliver. This in turn can increase the revenues because a lot of them are on gain share arrangements anyway. And if you can drive quick savings in this area, then you can start really showing your value. It also gives them something that they can track as reportable savings to their client stakeholders, right? It provides them air cover in these kind of speed to value categories, so that the pressure is off of them as they're working on executing those higher value, kind of longer term sourcing events up top. So the GPOs and third-party solutions such as tail spend are those kind of programs can be dropped into these categories, draw really quick results, and free up those resources to put them where they really are more warranted.
Yeah. I think an interesting thing to kind of just come right out and say that you've mentioned a couple of times, but consultancies are hopefully good at being profitable. And in order to be profitable, they have to understand their cost to serve so that they can hopefully deliver ROI for their clients, but also be profitable as a company. And procurement should be very much thinking about sourcing efforts in the same way. So in some cases, whether maybe it's tail spend, you manage that, we might be looking at a straight digital automated solution. But when we're looking at a category where the ROI might not be there for us to spend a whole bunch of hands-on time, GPOs become another way to manage that spend and those supplier relationships. We need to not just be thinking about managing the costs of consultants. We should be thinking about managing our own ROI and cost to serve our company as well, right? Sort of like an internal consultant, as we might talk about at Art of Procurement.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, enterprise procurement organizations at the end of the day are very similar to consultancies, right? Limited resources, big savings targets, tight timelines to deliver, right?
Yeah.
In fact, one of my old colleagues at Insight Sourcing Group published a thought piece a few years ago, said, called Run Your Procurement Org Like a Consultancy. And that's really what the best procurement orgs do in terms of how they allocate resources. They're very limited talent. GPOs here are a perfect solution for that. They're also a great solution for high growth companies where resources are really limited, or they might have very immature startup procurement organizations. This is really a rapid solution for some of the less strategic but still highly complex categories where having a turnkey type of solution that you can drop in place while you really focus on the things that are most important to your business is really applicable and drives a ton of ROI, and really gives you effectively for free an extension of your procurement organization itself.
Yeah. Now, I have a question that's come in from Michael that I'm going to pose to you, and I'm actually going to add a little piece on. So Michael has asked, what questions should I be asking to see if a GPO is a good fit for my organization? I would actually add on to that, if you decide that the answer is yes, how do you decide where to start, assuming you're not going to sort of throw all of your spend into it at the same time? What have you seen that's an effective sort of implementation or rollout strategy? But I'll let you answer Michael's first. What questions should you be asking internally to decide if a GPO is right for you?
Yeah, sure. Um, what we have found is asking the organization, what categories are they finding that they're spending a lot of time tactically managing, right? If you're spending a lot of your internal resources um, on something, we chose MRO as our focus area for that very reason. We found that not only procurement professionals, but buyers and maintenance teams, and even plant general managers were just spending a tremendous amount of their time managing a category that really is difficult to manage without a pretty significant amount of dedicated resources. So what are those nuisance categories really? Where, hey, the spend's important, not having the right product can actually shut down, my operations or can really impact my people. But where I'm just based on the amount of spend that's involved and the savings opportunity, I'm just finding that I'm spending an inordinate amount of time managing on a day-to-day basis. That's where I would suggest that you start. And then think about those resources and how they could be better allocated to something that's going to drive, really a larger impact to the business at the strategic level, and start to single those out for potential GPO inclusion. And then I would say also get familiar with what's out there. Do some research, find out who the leading GPOs are and the categories where they play. I think you'll be surprised. There's some things that you would say, oh yeah, it makes total sense that this would be a GPO program. You might be surprised. There's a lot of corporate services that may not even initially come to mind for you, where you can get a really good program in place rapidly through a GPO. Get familiar with them, who the leading GPOs are, what's in their catalog, and then do an alignment similar to kind of the matrix that I showed here a few minutes ago, and say what categories within my spend stack make sense here, and where could I benefit from having effectively third-party management of those categories, and also get all the benefits that come along with that, inclusive of sometimes the overlooked value of the really robust purchasing data that you'll also get through working with the GPO.
Now, you sort of teased the answer to this question with your mention of corporate services. I think something like MRO is exactly what people would expect to apply the GPO model to. But there are certainly products and services that are well beyond sort of the well-worn standard examples where GPOs can apply as well. What are some specific categories of spend, whether product or service, that might surprise people that they can be effectively managed through the GPO model?
Yeah, I think I'd be challenged to name a category that's truly shocking. There are some that are pretty niche. One thing I'll note, we recently added a whitewood pallet program. Not very sexy, but something that's very important to the business.
Yeah.
This had long been considered a category that really can't be nationally consolidated. Now it really is, and we're driving a lot of value there. On the really kind of bizarre things, I came across something recently called smart cities. I still don't really know what that means. I think it's a collection of just kind of the goods and services that go into supporting smart, urban planning. But again, something that I never would have thought would fall under, a GPO model. So really, kind of goes back to the point where there's literally thousands of GPO programs available out there. And as a sourcing professional, it's really important for you to understand that within the categories you manage, are there solutions out there that could drive me a lot of benefit without having to have my resources manage those areas?
And it certainly gives us an alternative. I sort of mentioned earlier the digital approach. It's a good reminder that not only are GPOs potentially an effective approach for some of those nuisance categories, as you mentioned, but if the big consultancies are doing it, then certainly internal procurement teams should be evaluating GPOs as a viable model. Brian, I want to thank you for being with us to share your expertise, to share that graphic, to answer some audience questions. I appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thanks to the audience. I really appreciate it, and be happy to hear from you on LinkedIn if you have any other questions that you'd like to reach out to me with.
Excellent. And we're not done. We have 2 more sessions today. In just 5 minutes, my colleague Helen McKenzie is going to be taking the stage with the team from CourseCentric to delve into one of those category-specific sessions which is all about not just packaging, but sustainable packaging. So we're going to take 5 quick minutes, and then we will be right back with the next session of Category Palooza.